When was your gut feeling actually right? Growing up, I was always wary of my uncle on my dad's side of the family, not blood related. Even as a young child, I just knew that I didn't like being around him. He never gave me any reason to feel this way, and I never voiced it to anyone. As I grew older, my family moved away, and I saw less of him. But anytime my extended family met for holidays, I would see him and avoid him. Couple years down the track, I was around 12 or 13, when my parents sat me and my older brother down and told us that my cousin, my uncle's daughter, had been raped and molested by him from a young age. This had all come to light when my aunt caught it happening later, found out she was abused by him too. Really wish my gut feeling hadn't been right about that one. Twice, while delivering pizza to shady neighborhoods, things didn't look right. I trusted my instincts and booked. Both times, no one ever called back to ask about their food never arriving. That's all the proof I need. I'll never understand the idea of robbing a pizza person. You're robbing, possibly assaulting or killing a working man woman for what is probably 20 or less. I've hung around with gang members and some pretty rough types, but none of them ever told me they did that. It was 1995. I was 18, still living with my parents, and I was walking home from a friend's house at about 2 AM in the middle of the summer. He only lived 5 or 6 blocks away, and we often hung out watching movies after I got off work. Usually I would drive to his house because we'd been out with other friends, but this night I had parked at home and we walked to his place. There's not usually a lot of traffic between our houses, but this night I was about halfway home when a pickup truck drives by with 2 guys in the cab and 2 in the bed. I immediately felt like I was in danger. I saw the truck turn the corner, and I dove over some hedges in the closest yard I could find. I hid under them. I saw the truck come back around the corner and slowly drive down the street. When it got to where I was hiding, I heard one of the guys say, "Where did he go?" and another respond that he didn't know. They kept driving, and I didn't see them again. I stayed hidden for a good 15 minutes before getting up and running the rest of the way home. I'm certain they would have jumped me if they found me. One of my mates had a similar experience while living in London. He worked in hospitality, which often meant he didn't get home until very late in a suburb called Seven Sisters, which wasn't the safest. He gets off the tube, starts walking back to his place at about 2 AM and notices there are 3 very large men following him. He said he couldn't explain it, but he started getting a weird feeling, so he tested it out by slowing down and speeding up his walking pace. They would match it every single time. He hadn't been living in this place very long and had 3 keys. One for the front door, one for the back door, and one for his room. Being a new place, he didn't have a feeling for which key was which quite yet, so when he got to his front door, the first key he tried didn't work. He looks back and notices the guys have opened the little gate to his small front yard garden and are on his property walking towards him. He tries the second key. It unlocks the front door. He closes it, locks it again, and kind of just collapses to his knees to look through the mail slot and sees the 3 guys just standing there talking amongst themselves for about 3 minutes before they take off. My mate asks himself what the duck they would have done to him if it had been the 3rd key that unlocks his front door. Driving in Pittsburgh, I stop at a red light. Hill goes up on my left, downhill on my right. Poor visibility to the left. The light turns green, but my brain tells me, hey bud, wait a second. I think this is a little weird, but I don't go yet. A millisecond later, a massive navy blue F-350 comes barreling downhill through the intersection from my left, blowing past the red light at about 45, then trundles down the hill. If I'd have gone, I would have been destroyed by 3 tons of Ford truck, for sure. Instead, I trusted the spider sense. Edit, apparently we all have an inherent sense of danger. Maybe there's something to that. Bonus story. I was going down a hill on some 2-lane highway when at the bottom of the hill I noticed there was a bus stop. For some reason, the bus wasn't pulled over to the side to pick people up, so he was blocking the entire right lane. I have to hit the brakes, partly due to speed, and mostly because I can't go around him because traffic is flying by on the left. As I'm waiting 10 feet behind him for a break in the cars in the left to go, something in the back of my mind says I bet someone else doesn't see that bus. So I look in my rear view and sure enough, there's a white Toyota Tundra, another truck, barreling toward me way too fast. No time for thinking. Jay just hit the go button and swing my car to the right to try to move onto the shoulder, reasoning being that it'll mitigate the impact a little. I was right. The lady hit me, bounced me around, and sent my phone flying. But when we got out and inspected our vehicles, neither were damaged. She apologized. I just was thrown off by that bus. I reassured her it was fine. We bumped elbows and continued. I stopped at Home Depot to pick up an item, so I knew it was going to be a quick trip. I'm in the store and notice I'm pretty much the only girl in there besides employees. I couldn't find what I was looking for and had to ask multiple employees before I found it. I check out, and as I'm heading out to my car I notice a shady dude standing against a tree on one side of my car. On the other side of my car is another shady guy sticking his arm outside of his car window. When I walked out they both turned and stared at me. My heart dropped. I started to feel queasy, and my mind instantly knew to turn around and go inside. I stood there shaking at the front of the store until I could get the courage to ask an employee to walk me to my car. As soon as they saw me walking out with an employee, the guy standing by the tree walked around my car and into the driver's side of the car parked next to me. To this day I swear I was a short walk away from being kidnapped. I had been living and working in Korea, and one day I was coming up out of a subway station and saw a man talking to another foreign woman. She had that polite, frozen smile on her face, the "why is this guy talking to me" smile. I walked up to her, linked my arm with hers, and said, "Hey, Sarah, there you are you ready to go?" and just started walking. The guy followed us, but I sped up and made an abrupt turn into a coffee shop. We hid, and I saw him walk past, still looking for her. We ended up getting coffee and chatting for a bit, and I found out that he had followed her off the train and had been getting increasingly aggressive for the last 10 minutes. I don't know what might have happened, but I'm really glad I interfered. I have a somewhat similar story. My friend and I were out clubbing, and as we were leaving the club I noticed there was a super drunk girl sitting outside. My friend and I are both female, so we decided it would be okay to approach her and ask her if she was okay and if she needed any help. Turns out her English wasn't great, so she didn't really understand what we were saying and motioned with her hands for us to go away. I walked up to the bouncer and asked him to keep an eye on her and make sure she gets home safe. He nodded, so my friend and I started walking to the McDonald's close by the club. We are about 5 minutes into the walk and I get the urge to look back behind me. I look and see the same woman from outside the club surrounded by 2 men. I instantly knew that she didn't know the 2 men and that she was not comfortable, so I stopped in my path, told my friend to wait, then ran to her, grabbed her hand and walked her and I back to my friend. We ended up buying her a meal at McDonald's, and even though there was a language barrier she thanked us profusely. We then waited for her friend to pick her up. I'm really glad I interfered too. My cousin introduced me to her friend, and I told her I don't really like him. He seemed nice, but he gives off a really weird vibe. I think I even avoided shaking his hand. I coughed into it and said sorry, I need to wash my hands. Later found out she was dating him and he was abusive and threatened to kill her and was unhinged. Back when I was about 10 or 11 I asked my mother if we could take my grandmother out to lunch. She was kind of against it, but I kept insisting that I really wanted to see my grandmother and that she would want to go to lunch that day. While we were out at the mall, after getting lunch with my grandmother, she started slurring her speech and became extremely confused. She was having a stroke. Luckily, my mom noticed what was going on and got her to the hospital within 20 or 30 minutes. Doctors said they were able to stop the stroke and she came out of it basically the same as she was before. Couple days after the fact, my mom told me I had basically saved my grandmother's life by making sure we went out to lunch with her that day. Used to work in the emergency room. Had a man come in with ripping chest pain that started not but 30 minutes prior after he moved something heavy at his office. I knew he was going to die just by looking at him. Massive overwhelming dread just seemed to engulf me. I did his EKG and I hoped something would be wrong with it so we could get him a bed. His EKG was perfect. Not 5 minutes later he went into cardiac arrest on our waiting room floor after running the code for 45 minutes. He didn't make it. He had a massive aortic dissection. There wasn't much hope. This was almost 3 years ago and I've seen more shit since then. But the memory is still burned in my mind. And it hurts knowing I was the last person to speak to him. This happened to my dad. He was just sitting on the couch, then it felt like my spine snapped and broke. He called around asking people if he was in enough pain to go to the hospital. He hates needles and will do anything not to go, but my family convinced him he had to go and they called an ambulance. Turns out his aorta was leaking tore. Everything happened so fast with the surgery and boom, he survived. After everything settled, we kept on being told how lucky he was to survive the ambulance, then how even more lucky he was to survive the surgery. Every time I think of what must have went right for him to survive, I am amazed by what doctors can do. Helped a victim of human trafficking get to a shelter. Context: I was a medical student at the time, now a resident, and the city my school was in is a hub for human trafficking. I noticed a patient in the emergency room who had a pretty bad injury to her face, was with a sketchy looking guy who was not related to her. She wasn't my patient, but I brought my gut feeling up to her doctor, who then made up some excuse to talk to the patient alone and got her to help. I never talked to her myself, but I couldn't shake the vibe I got from looking at her and the man she was with. There are a bunch of bars right next to my university here where I live. At the start and the end of the semester, everybody, thousands of students, start gathering around the street where most bars are located and just parties all night. On one of these occasions, in 2019, it was the end of the semester. I had just got there a bit late because I was working on the lab at the uni, and the moment I got there something just didn't feel right. The people there, how they were acting, how they were moving, how they were talking. Something felt different in the air. We were crossing through the giant group of people since we were looking for my girlfriend at the time and the people who we were expecting to meet there. I froze in place and I can't really explain why to this day, but I just felt something really bad was about to happen, and my friend noticed how I was too attentive and kind of in panic. He snapped me out of it and I told him that we needed to find everyone and leave that place. For my surprise, he just agreed. I think he noticed something was wrong with me and probably just went for it so I could calm down. My girlfriend and our friends didn't take long to find, and they were confused because I was acting so erratic and I was kind of having a panic attack. But they eventually followed me out of the crowd, and right as we were out of the bar area we started hearing a bunch of gunshots and people started screaming. Shortly after, the police was rushing into the area. What happened was that some gang members decided to use the party to settle some score, probably hoping the crowd would help them get out unnoticed. 5 people were killed and 3 injured that day. The police apparently caught them, but I'm not sure about that part. After that, those periodical parties at this street were never the same. Way less people, and now they don't even close the streets anymore because it's not that big of a crowd. Who would have thought? To this day my friends like telling this story about how I saved their lives, and on rare occasions someone asks me if I knew about the gang fight that was going to happen or something like that. I honestly don't know what triggered me that day, but myself and the people with me are really glad it did. I think I might have caught view of a gun while crossing the crowd and didn't consciously notice it, but kicked some sense of danger on me. It started out as a gut feeling when I felt that something was off about my mom's boyfriend. Once I felt this way, I started to notice the red flags. The first one was the way my dog reacted to him. Even to this day, he's the only person my dog flat out didn't like. I think he might have even kicked him at one point when we weren't around. The next major red flag I noticed was that whenever his daughters came over 6 and 8, they rarely wanted to spend time with their own father and would hang out with my mom. It almost felt like they were trying to avoid him. I ended up bringing my concerns to my mom, and she started to notice things too and so broke it off with him. A few months later she gets contacted by an investigator. Apparently, the boyfriend had been caught trying to sleep with his current girlfriend's daughter, so they wanted to get a statement from mom. I'm just glad he got caught, and it sounds like he'll be in jail for quite some time. My mom's the only woman in the house, so I don't think the dude was trying to come after my brother or I. Plus, we are both bigger than the man too. When I was a kid I had this teacher, I think grade 3, who was really creepy towards all of us girls. We would notice him looking at girls' butts or down their shirts. He was really weird and always found a reason to make girls stay after class for whatever. He gave me a really terrible feeling that I had never gotten from someone before. I never got too close to him and always made sure I wasn't in his room alone. I'm 25 now, and he just got arrested last year for having child pornography and was also caught with a hidden camera in his pen that he would take pictures down girls' shirts with. So creepy. Can't imagine the amount of videos pics this man has. He was an older man when he taught me in grade 3 and just got caught last year. Last year, I was staying up late watching Rick and Morty. My mom had been battling stage 4 metastatic breast cancer for a while. That night, she walked downstairs and just sat there with me until I decided to go to bed. I looked at her and in my heart I knew she was close to leaving. So I said goodnight and she said goodbye, which confused me until the next morning when my dad woke me up and told me she had passed away overnight. It still makes me wonder how we both knew. I was a 20-year-old student, alone in my apartment one evening. I was expecting the cable guy, so when I heard a knock at the door I opened it. I saw an older man. That definitely was not the cable guy as he did not have a uniform on. I asked him what he wanted. He said he was going around the apartments installing security alarms. I right away did not trust him and told him that was a bad time and that my roommate was on the phone long distance when long distance was expensive with her parents and was going through some personal stuff. She was not there, but I did not want him to think I was alone. He said, "Where is she?" I just closed the door in his face and said, "Not a good time." I called my landlord the next morning and asked her about installing security alarms, and she had no idea what I was talking about and did not authorize it. Woman, if you ever get into a situation where it looks like you are alone, really try to convince the person that is making you feel uneasy that you are not alone. Another time when I was young, walking home in the dark and two men stopped their car and started saying lewd things to me. I just walked up to a house and knocked on the door and they drove off quickly. Way more vulnerable when you are alone. One thing I realized does a lot is having a pair of obviously male shoes. I still have a pair of spare shoes from my older brother, who wore significantly larger shoes than I do, and they really stand out on the shoe rack because he had done some weird spray painting on them and look obviously worn. Every single time anyone comes to visit, I see them notice the shoe rack and that unique pair of much larger shoes. Without fail, I'm convinced it helps make them think a guy is around, especially since at least a small handful of visitors, mainly handymen of various kinds, have brought it up. Aside from that, having a way to check who is knocking before opening the door is pretty much a must-have in my opinion. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.